Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Hell Money Podcast, Taproot Wizards Takeover. Your favorite Taproot Wizard, Tyler, aka Dr. DAO, here with you today to talk about a lot of interesting things.
That's right. Listen, yeah, who needs an opener when you have the best? Welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I assume everybody knows who you are, but just in case, what's your deal?
Oh, okay. I was going to do the intro, but fine.
Oh, go ahead,
Pass
Aaron.
it off to him. It's all good.
Yeah.
This is Tyler Whittle, head of products at Taproot Wizards / sorcerer at Taproot Wizards, as you can clearly see by his uniform. But he's also the creator of BIPland, which is what we're here to talk about today. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about a million other things as well. But of course, Casey and I are in costume as the Ordinals BIP,
This is fantastic.
which doesn't exist, right?
It exists.
No, it exists.
Luke just hasn't given it a number yet. It's
Right.
only
Okay.
a matter of time.
Actually, explain that. So you have a. What's the difference between having a BIP and having a BIP number? Like,
Oh, man.
Go for it.
sorry, I'm already launching.
Yeah, let's just launch right into
Go for
it.
it. Let's do it. Before we start, I got to say, I think BIPland is incredible. I saw it. I was like, this is fucking amazing. It's a chutes and ladders depiction of the process of proposing a change to Bitcoin or documenting a change to Bitcoin or even documenting something that happens on top of or outside of Bitcoin. It's a very arcane process. And Tyler made this amazing website at quantumcats.xyz
/BIP
Slash
plans?
BIPland,
Yeah.
/BIPland, which is a guide through all the steps of the process with like illustrations and links and everything. And this is something, the BIP process is something that nobody understands, right? Like even experienced people don't understand what BIPs are, don't understand what BIPs are for, don't understand how they happen.
And what is a BIP?
Yeah. What is a BIP?
Bitcoin improvement proposal?
Yeah.
Bitcoin.
Yeah, look at Aaron. Look at Aaron knows
Answering
what
my
it
own
is.
questions.
Yeah. What is it? What is a BIP?
I mean, yeah, it's a good question. I really don't know that anyone knows the answer. There's, I guess, BIP1 actually defines like the
That's right.
the
Yep.
Bitcoin improvement proposal process.
And the author of BIP1?
I was reading it last night.
It's Amir Taki.
Yes.
And Amir Taki is a literal anarchist revolutionary. He's a British national, but he went to Syria to fight in the Syrian civil war on behalf of Rojava, a sort of breakaway anarcho-libertarian utopian state in the Northeast. So he literally took up arms.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
Like we're all posers except for Amir Taki.
How far we've fallen since BIP1, to be honest.
I know, yeah. And he's like these days, I haven't heard him talk in a long time, but for a long time he was like, yeah, you guys are all fucking pussies. Like, what are you doing? Like asking for permission, like, oh, I'm an ETF. Like, no, you the bankers' heads go on the pikes, the blood of the bureaucrats runs in the street. Like, this is not the way.
It's like really funny that that's the origin of BIPs. Like this man who's just like, fuck it, do whatever you want, is, the godfather of the process.
How far we've fallen to go from Amir Taki to Luke Jr.
Yeah, now we can't even get
and here
Ordinals
we
BIP
are,
number.
we're like, you show up to the citadel of Luke Jr. He has his 20 children around, and you're like,
That's right.
please bless me with a BIP number. So for some reason, give me this thing that is in no way stated in any formal specification of like the BIP process. Like you look at all their flowcharts, BIP number appears nowhere.
Yeah.
But like you must get one of these things and be blessed by this now only one person who is allowed to hand these things down to continue your process of trying to change or inform people in the case of Ordinals about things happening in Bitcoin.
Well, that's what's so funny about the Ordinals BIP is that it's actually not even like a change to Bitcoin at all. Like in what it is. I mean, this is, as I said, this is literally the Ordinals BIP. It's just informing people that Ordinals exists and that it's related to Bitcoin. And that's the crux.
And that's one of the big misunderstood things about Bitcoin or about BIPs is that people think that it is they think that it's a proposal to change Bitcoin, and it's not. There are many BIPs that don't change Bitcoin that are layers above Bitcoin, like wallet software and the peer-to-peer network and all these things. And also people think that acceptance of the BIP is predicated on the BIP being a good idea. It is not predicated on the BIP being a good idea. It is literally a form of documentation, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what it's supposed to be, right? So again, it's like a BIP is supposed to be a Bitcoin improvement proposal, and then I think there are 3 types of them that it can fall into. Whether it's is the Ordinals one is called, I think, informational.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
And then there's the actual like, I want to do consensus level changes to Bitcoin, which is called something else. And then there's like one
standards
that's
track?
standards. And then there's like one that's kind of in between. It's like, hey, we want to like change some things, but it's not a consensus level change. Like we just want to mess around. But
so then what, like BIP 119, like OPC TV,
Yeah.
where does that fall in those 3
squarely
categories?
falls in the like standards track. We are making consensus
A change.
level change
And
to
so
Bitcoin.
opcat is
Opcat would be the same.
I think I'm actually wrong. I think standards track is like status, and type is a different thing.
Yeah.
Like my BIP is like informational, but it's not like standards track. Like standards track is like things can be like draft, standards track, withdrawn, or final, or something. And then the other thing, the what kind of BIP is a separate attribute.
Yeah, I should have printed out the like, the various charts we have.
Yeah.
But like at a high level, it seems like the BIP process was supposed to be is like, hey, we as this organization of Bitcoin want a way to document potential changes or important things that are happening. And it seems like that's kind of how it started. But then over the course of time, that process has been like corrupted and malleated in such a way that now it's this confusing miasma of how do you actually do anything on Bitcoin. And it seems like what's happened is instead of being this, clean documentation that has very clear, like either it's objectively fits this criteria or it doesn't. And if it does, it like shows up on the BIP page. It's now this weird political process with all these actors that have, taken over
many
and
such cases,
found their source of, power within the community and kind of hold these weird structural positions.
Well, I think that's what's so interesting. Like, I think this is something that a lot of people outside of Bitcoin don't understand about Bitcoin, and it's like very confusing to them. Is like, there's no CEO of Bitcoin, right? It's like there's no structure like that would standardize or formalize any of this. It's kind of just like the right person at the right time with the right level of motivation to make something happen. And oftentimes the people that are motivated to do something like work on Bitcoin Core are not like sane, normal people. Well, no hate to Bitcoin Core developers, because many of them are like
sane, normal people.
Yeah.
Most of them,
Right. But it like it's more this like kind of like it's like a selection process that's not top down, right? Like it's not like you're like interviewed to be anything relative to Bitcoin. It's kind of just
I think the main thing is that things have governance, right? Different things have different kinds of governance, and they think of formal governance when they think of governance.
Exactly.
Right?
And
so they want to know, like, it's when people ask, like, well, is this project decentralized? What's the decentralized governance? They're interested in formal, quote unquote, decentralized governance, which is always like DAO votes and some stupid shit that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Bitcoin has actually decentralized governance where everybody can do what they want, run whatever software they want. And like, we all just have to argue about the changes that we want until they happen.
so all this being said,
That's how you know that we've come back from a cut, is we go, all this being said, I have no idea what we're talking about.
I like to
Segue.
imagine that Jason just keeps all of it in, and then it's like, we get like way into the weeds.
Yeah, what do you all want to? I can do an introduction and then we can.
I have a good pivot question, including me saying I'm going to pivot. But okay, all that being said, I think the BIP process it's interesting that like, we haven't had this kind of good documentation of how this process even works until sort of BIP land. It's kind of this like obscure thing. If you know, but otherwise like, and even if you know, you probably don't know. So I'm curious, like, how did you get to be in a position where it's like your job to make something like this? Like how are you sitting here on How Money Podcast in a wizard outfit talking about the path to make a Bitcoin improvement proposal?
Yeah, great question. We'll see if I know the answer to that myself as well. So I did my PhD in organizations,
Fellow
and
academia.
entrepreneur- yeah. Erin's much more intelligent than me, so she's left her PhD. That's how I identify.
But
the
you
smart
get to be
ones.
Dr. Dow.
Yeah,
So
you have to like somehow deal with the cognitive dissonance of I spent 6 years of my life on this thing that now has like minimal relevance to anything that I do.
Whatever, Dr. Whittle, please continue.
Yeah. So at weddings, that's the only time I'm like, yeah, that's a good time to be a doctor.
Absolutely.
When on my like little name tag, I'm like, I can be Dr. Whittle at the wedding. Any other aspect of life, I'm like, please do not refer to me as a doctor.
This is a dark period of my life.
I do not condone that type of behavior. But I spent 6 years studying organizations and then took a brief 2-year stint in venture capital. But a lot of what I was doing there was actually building incubator and accelerator program. So I'm very passionate about education. That's why I did a PhD in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so as I was doing that, I kind of fell down the crypto rabbit hole because I started that in summer of 2021.
Mm-hmm. And you were in the Bay Area.
I was in the Bay Area.
So it's,
and I'm working with young student entrepreneurs. And so at this time, like, let me tell you what a student entrepreneur wanted to do. They want to make a fucking DeFi protocol or start an NFT project because they're like, I see all the money that's being made.
Yeah, right.
And so I got kind of crypto pilled through that. And then the first thing I did was actually worked on building a DAO in Ethereum because...
Can you say which DAO?
Yeah. It was called DAO Masters. My friend Julia started it. Mm-hmm. I knew nothing. Like, I'd invested some of my student loans in crypto as any proper PhD student had done, but like hadn't really fallen down the rabbit hole. And so DAOs...
That's degenerate.
That is degenerate as fuck.
Degenerate.
But that's degenerate behavior
Levered
I condone.
long crypto on one side, your education on the other.
Well, when they pay you what you're getting paid in the PhD,
you got to do.
The risk calculus changes a bit.
Absolutely.
Aaron knows.
You have literally nothing to lose.
Exactly. So people were like, DAOs are going to revolutionize the way organizations work. You like have to check it out. And I'm like, all right, I'm like kind of skeptical here. I've spent, a while reading pretty much every paper that's been written on organizations the past 6 years. And like they work the way they do for a reason, and it's not because people haven't tried other things.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's so interesting. Sorry to interrupt, but like it's interesting that you like studied the way that these kind of and it's I mean when you say organization, you mean like private organization, right? Like in
a lot of
company.
Yeah, a lot of what I was looking at was companies, firms. Why do and I was more into the strategy aspect. So like, why do certain, firms or companies
succeed,
or organizations win over others?
Yeah.
I think like the distinction between me and more of like a sociologist is a sociologist just wants to be very descriptive. Mm-hmm. They're like, this is how the world is. And I'm very competitive. I hate hearing like, don't just tell me how it is. Tell me how I can do better or be better.
Right.
I don't think people understand the joint stock corporation. Like I don't think people understand like the subtlety in like why it is the way it is and all the little details of like, well, you want to do this joint venture. So you have, you want people to get to share in the upside of that joint venture. So they invest, but you don't want them to get sued when the venture, you don't want investors to be like, am I going to get fucked if they do something bad and I get sued?
Right.
And also I'm not, managing this thing. I have no way of preventing them from committing fraud. And so then you have limited liability.
Yeah.
And then you have like, oh, well, do you have like shareholders vote on what the company does? And you're like, no, direct democracy doesn't work. So okay, is the shareholder going to elect the people that run the company? Like, no, like that would also be crazy direct democracy.
Right.
So we have shareholders elect a board and the board appoints executives. And like, this works very well. And also, it's backed up by the legal system. It's backed up by the state enforcing shareholder rights.
Yeah.
And then all these different weird ass formulations of like DAOs and stuff, they're like missing some critical component. Yep. Like they're like, oh, we're going to do direct democracy. And it's like, okay, that's crazy. Or like, oh, we're going to do this without limited liability because we don't have any. And we're like, bro, like that's a joint general partnership. You all have unlimited individual and several liability.
Right.
And like, oh, we're going to do this without the state backing up our property rights. And then it's like, yeah, but then the voters can't actually control, they get fucked, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a question I actually like to pose some of the students we were teaching in one of our crypto education things is Bitcoin the original DAO?
Is Bitcoin the original
And I think
DAO?
it's a really interesting question because where I found that like DAOs suck as organizations.
Yeah.
They are bad.
Dr.
Like,
DAO says you're
no,
very sick.
It's like funny.
Dr. DAO
Stage
says
4.
Exactly. It's like they're worse than organizations in almost every way, except when you are forced to have a DAO. And it's like when you look at Ethereum, you are like almost forced to govern in a DAO format because you have no other choice, because a blockchain actually almost dictates that governance occurs in this weird, like, you know, nodes get votes and like have this much power. And there's really like, there's no other way to do it if you want to maintain the decentralized property of the blockchain. And so that's why I say, like, you know, is Bitcoin the original DAO? Because in many ways it has, like, you know, you have the miners, you have the node runners, you have the economic actors, you have the devs, and like really the Bitcoin organization is the weird agglomeration of all of these various stakeholder groups trying to work together to make something happen.
Yeah.
And it is actually like decentralized and somewhat autonomous. Like it works, as we can see, like Bitcoin still functions. Is it an ideal form of organization for anything besides a blockchain?
Yeah, probably
No.
not.
No.
Yeah.
There's no way.
And so when people are like, oh, like, you know, this company should have a DAO to like do its innovation or something, like, no, companies have tried that. Like, yes, on occasion, like you do want like this separate group spun off that is somewhat removed from the company, but DAOs on Ethereum in that boom time at least had this weird idea that they should produce things. And I think DAOs are good for governing things. They are not good at producing things.
Yeah.
If you want to produce something, start a startup. You want very tightly coupled people. I do not want decentralized governance. I want hard power. I want structure.
Yeah.
Like that gets us where we need to go faster.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something I think I've said a million times on this podcast, but I think like decentralization is this word that a lot of people use, like democracy or capitalism, where they think they know what it means.
Yeah.
They think they want it or don't want it,
Yeah.
but they don't really know what it actually is. And so like the thing that I often ask, like, you know, crypto projects that are trying to do like a DAO or be like decentralized blah, like, you know, decentralized social media, decentralized whatever, is I'm like, why does it have to be on a blockchain? Does it make it better for this to be on a blockchain? Does it actually function better? Or do you just have it in your mind that decentralization is an ideal that you should push for?
Right.
And so you are attempting to emulate that in whatever definition of the word you think that actually means.
Yeah. And I see that a lot. Like,
All the time.
having done the VC bit for a little while, people would always come in and be like, look, it's decentralized, it's on the blockchain. I'm like, why?
Exactly.
Why? Like, give me a good reason why. And it's like, no, decentralization's good. And I'm like, why? Like,
Exactly. That's
is
what
your product's better? No? Okay, great. Like, I'm going to keep using Facebook or Instagram, but like, good luck with your, you know, decentralized social media.
Good luck with
Absolutely.
your preposterous ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so you like already your path is kind of confusing, but so you went from like academia to then kind of VC like startup life, and then got introduced to crypto through that.
Yeah, and then so about 2 years working at Floodgate, the VC firm, and towards the end of it, I was just really falling further and further down the crypto rabbit hole. I got really deep down zkML on Ethereum.
zkML.
It's really interesting. It's proving AI models. So basically, if you wanted to put an AI model on the blockchain, you can prove that like this AI model was run on this data.
Does it only work for like incredibly small models?
So there are companies that are building things that allow it to work for larger and larger models.
That could allow it to work for larger models if the things that they built work, or do they actually?
No,
work?
they do work. So one of the companies I work with is called Modulus Labs, and they were at like the forefront of this. They work with a protocol called Upshot on Ethereum that does NFT lending, but before they used Modulus, they just literally used an AWS server, and you would like trust them that they were properly pricing these NFTs and not like, oh, hey, like Casey, you showed up with a Bored Ape. Like, let me just mark that one up a bit because, we're friends. Sucks for the person who gave you that loan. Instead, now you can output basically a ZK proof that says this model was run. And so at the very least, you can know that the model that was run on my NFT was the same one that was run on your NFT.
Right.
So either our model's like good or bad, and the market can decide whether we've like done this correctly, but here's like a proof that this was the model.
That just seems so
run.
hard, like, because the models are so huge, and running a model involves calculating, like multiplying all these floats together. So I would think that the proofs would just be super large.
So you can compress the proofs down, like in the same way that, like Starkware works, where you just take all the proofs and you continually compress them, and you generate basically the Merkle root, and you're like, here's the root.
Yeah.
Same thing in zkML. So you end up still getting this small proof out of there. The real question is actually how much more expensive is it to do this? And so companies are actually making strides on that to really reduce the proof size, or sorry, not the proof size, but the cost of proving down. Because like a year ago, it was 10,000 times more expensive to run a model and have it ZK, and have a ZK proof generated of it. Whereas now, like the Modulus team has gotten some of theirs down to like 80 to 100x, and I think that's going to continue to go down. It's interesting though, like there may be use cases outside of blockchain. Like we're talking about putting this on the blockchain, but if like healthcare, I think is an interesting use case where if you wanted to use a model that said like, should you have this surgery? Like, would you pay an extra $10 to know that no one messed with the model on the back end? Like I would. I'd be like, like I want to know that, heart surgery model 42.0 was the one that was run and not like, hey, some hacker actually had back end access to this thing and told me to have heart surgery when I shouldn't.
Right.
So anyway, like kind of floated around in a lot of different areas, but met a team that was building a ZK rollup on Bitcoin called Alpin Labs in December of 2022. And in Ethereum, I felt like everything was saturated, and at this point, what I knew of Bitcoin was like great store of value. No one uses it for anything. There's Lightning, which is like, people say they're going to use it, but when you look at the volume, no one's using it. So like, I got very interested in this because I had spent a lot of time in the ZK space, looking at like Starkware and working with the Modulus team. And then these guys come along and they're like, Bitcoin needs a ZK rollup. And I was like, why does Bitcoin need a ZK rollup? Like, look, the fees are 1 sat per VByte.
Right.
And my mental model was you build a rollup because you want to scale, because like fees are high, because usage is so high. Right. You need to take this execution up another level. And so I start talking with these guys. I dig into their white paper, and I kind of like commit myself to doing this in January, and then Ordinals pops off in February. And so I'm like doing this write up. I'm exploring why Bitcoin needs a ZK rollup. The light bulb's kind of gone off that, hey, if you wanted to take a USDC loan against your Bitcoin, like we're going to need a layer 2, or we're going to need some type of improvement. And so the light bulb went off that like, it's not about scaling, the number of transactions, but it's actually about scaling some of the functionality of Bitcoin. And that might be why you would want a roll up on Bitcoin.
Interesting. Okay, so because I recently I went to Ord Denver, recently, and it's insane.
There was
like,
some Ethereum satellite event at the same time.
yeah. I hear they were really mad that a bunch of these Bitcoin people were showing up.
I just heard they were trying to figure out how to buy ordinals.
But like one thing that I noticed there is like, I mean, everyone's building a fucking L2.
Yep.
Like everyone is building an L2
Well, it's the
now.
same like sad sack playbook on Ethereum being like recapitulated on Bitcoin. Like
Right.
that's how you get a VC check on Ethereum. They're all glorified multisig, so they're like, hey, let's port our glorified multisig to Bitcoin and get a VC check.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine. He's working on an interesting Bitcoin project. He's working on like a Bitcoin, an open source analyzer that does like transaction clustering. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe you guys could like, do this in this way and like raise some VC money. And he was like, yeah, okay, but like, why would we raise, like, what's the point of raising VC money? I'm like, no. This is the
point.
end. This is the goal. You raise VC money and then you cut yourself checks from that VC money until it runs out. And then you raise more at like a 10x valuation, right? Like this is the new economy, guys.
Yeah.
It is. It literally is.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting that like that narrative is spinning up because of like ordinals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, thanks
Yeah.
for that.
I'm sorry.
You
Yeah.
fucked it all up.
It's pretty weird, It's pretty weird that like this like trivial thing, this like, oh look, you can collect sats and like, oh look, you can make NFTs.
Right.
Is like, has led to all this like activity. And I think people really just needed like one thing that they could do with Bitcoin.
Right.
One demonstration of, hey, look, here's how you can build some higher level protocol on top of Bitcoin. And then that kind of everybody was like, oh, of course, like, yeah, let's do all this other stuff.
I think it's like two factors. It's like one is like what you're saying, and I think you've said before, is like ordinals kind of created this like new low hanging fruit on Bitcoin that had previously all been picked, where it's like maybe you start building something on ordinals, or you start kind of playing around with ordinals, and that teaches you a little bit about Bitcoin, and then you're like, oh, okay, like maybe I could do this on Bitcoin now, because you sort of have more familiarity with it than you would have if you just what did you do with Bitcoin before besides just like stack sats, right?
Right.
So I think there's that element where it's like it opened up like a pathway in for devs. And then I think the other thing is like, that we saw crazy fee spikes because of ordinals. And so then you think, oh, maybe Bitcoin doesn't scale. Like maybe we need an L2. Maybe that I could build an L2, I have an idea for an L2. And so I think it's both of those things kind of acting together that then leads to this like, now there's like probably 100 fucking L2s.
When are you raising for your L2?
Exactly, yeah. When ordinals L2. When can we put ordinals on an L2?
Well, one thing I really like is ordinals can't be lifted onto an L2.
Yeah.
It fucking can't.
No, so people tried to tell me.
You can't.
People were trying to tell me, and I said no.
Yeah,
no. But what they actually meant, it was interesting. I had like a long conversation with someone about this where they were like, no, you can with mine. And I was like, no, you can't. No, you can't. But what they meant was that you could put in your ordinal, right? Like you could lock up your ordinal in an L2. Inscription really is what they meant. You can lock up your inscription in an L2, and then you can do stuff with that inscription in the L2, and then you can bring it back. Like the example they were providing was, and I actually really like this guy. Like it was a good conversation. I don't mean to like be shitting on him, but the example he provided was like, let's say you put like, your Bitcoin frog or whatever on
Rivet.
Casey, you're gonna rivet on how many podcasts? I'm not sure that's allowed when we have a Taproot Wizard here.
I'm gonna put this wizard hat on here before the end of the episode.
But like the example he provided is like, you put your Bitcoin frog onto the L2, and then you can like play around with it like a video game character, and like you can dress it up in different outfits, and then you can like reinscribe a new image with your Bitcoin on that same sat with your Bitcoin frog in that new outfit. And I was like, I think you're just describing a website. I literally think you're just describing a website. And he's like, well, no, but it's on a blockchain, so that means it's decentralized.
I was going to say, that was going to be
like went exactly back to this.
Yeah.
He was like, but he's a decentralized internet maxi. You know what I mean? Like he's someone who thinks like everything needs to be decentralized because that's like the best form of it. I hope if he's watching this, I really liked our conversation. But I don't mean this, but I think it's a good example of that kind of like mentality where it's like, you're just like, oh, well, I'll just make this, but decentralized. And like, yeah, it was just funny. The pitch was literally like, I can put ordinals on my L2. Like that was
yeah.
I was like, no, you can just lock up an ordinal for a while and then unlock it at some point later. And anyone can do that, like at any time. But anyway, so Okay, I don't think we've gotten fully to your like Taproot Wizards Bitland arc.
Okay. So
right?
the way I got connected with the Taproot Wizards was last March. I published this big long piece like why Bitcoin needs a ZK rollup, and a lot of it clicked for me as I started watching Ordinals. It was like, oh, there's two things. One, there's this like cultural movement to bring the like fun of the other shitcoin chains over to Bitcoin, and then there's and then like as you see that happening, that there's finally a demand for some functionality that goes beyond what the layer one can offer. And so I wrote this big long piece. It's like, there's this cultural movement. Lightning's not going to cut it. We're going to need something that allows you to even do basic things like take a loan out on your Bitcoin via a smart contract and not have to worry about whether Gemini is going to implode or FTX is going to trade your Bitcoin in like a 100x leverage position in the back end and go out of business. And so, I wrote this piece, and then Udi, Eric, and Far all liked it. And so I was like, oh, this is like cool. And at this time, I must mention, I was like still a complete NFT fader. Like I thought JPEGs on the blockchain were stupid.
And look at you now.
I know. I bought one on Ethereum. I didn't get it. I mean, to
be fair, NFTs on the JPEGs on the blockchain are stupid, but that's the point.
Yeah. Fair.
Ribbit,
Yeah, ribbit.
Gmeow. And so, like all that was going on, I reached out to them because I was like, I'd really gotten fascinated with Bitcoin. I was like, it felt like it was this blue ocean that had been just sitting, that no one had really been innovating on. And I got really excited because I saw that I saw this movement coming. I knew it had been important to a lot of other chains. And I was like, okay, this is a chance to kind of be at the forefront of this. And this feels really interesting. So met up with them in Miami and just chatted with Eric. And I was like, hey, I'm like looking to leave VC. I want to get back to building. And I told him, I was like, I'm talking like with this other team that's building a ZK rollup. Like I'm thinking about that. And he's like, well, why would you do that? Just come work for us. And I was like, okay.
Maybe I will.
Maybe I will.
Why
yeah.
shouldn't I?
Yeah. So like on the plane ride home from Miami, I wrote them like a 5-page cover letter of like, here's what I think I can do for you. Here's what I'm good at. I'd spent a lot of time thinking about building community. And I think that's what I love about Taproot Wizards is our products are at this weird intersection of like community mixed with NFT, mixed with like deep tech. And I really love being able to kind of float around between all of those things. And it just like suits me well as kind of, I'm easy to be nerd sniped. And so when you're like, hey, you can like, study, the deep technicals of Bitcoin one day, because if you don't understand that, then you can't explain this product well to people. But also like we need to think about how to interact with the community in a meaningful way and stoke them. And think about that, organizational aspect. And so I love kind of being able to float around in this weird intersection that crypto lets you live in.
Well, that's what's cute is you actually are kind of like being an academic within Bitcoin still. You know what I mean? Like you're like, well, I wrote this paper and I'm studying this thing.
Yeah.
Like it's nice to see that kind of like intellectual legacy.
Writing a 5-page cover letter, that's like some PhD
That's
shit.
some PhD ass shit.
That's some real
Absolutely.
shit.
But I mean, actually, we were talking about this earlier off pod and I stopped because I thought
where the real magic happens.
Yeah. And I stopped just because I thought it would be interesting. But like, I mean, you basically went from knowing nothing about Bitcoin to now like making Bitland.
Yeah.
How did you learn about Bitcoin? Because there's so many people who right now are getting into Bitcoin because like number go up. And then they're like, oh my God, I can't even tell you how many texts I get from people being like, what book do I read? Like, what thing should I watch? And I'm like, I don't know, become autistically fixated on it and like learn everything that you can through weird avenues that you could never trace back for someone. That's how I did it. Like, but I think, you actually kind of, approached it more like an academic or like a student, So like, how did you learn about Bitcoin enough to be able to actually write something of kind of like intellectual or academic importance about it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because that was literally my thought, because I was a JPEG fader, but a lot of people were like, NFTs are amazing. My friend Alok, who actually is our lead investor, was like, NFTs are amazing. You don't get it. And I was like, all right, Alok, you're like the smartest person I know when it comes to blockchains, crypto. So I'm going to like remove my doubts and jump into one of these communities. And so the first thing I did was, of course, being as I am, I go and like join, and this is before there were 100K inscriptions. So I go and join all the like sub 100K discords. And I'm like, well, if I know one thing, it's like a strong community is what matters. And at this point in time, the bandits community was just like going wild. The Bitcoin bandits.
He doesn't know anything.
You don't know
it.
anything.
You expect like he's gonna know stuff.
You were
He doesn't
busy
know
like
stuff.
building the important things.
Yeah.
The rest of us.
That's what I was busy with.
The rest of us were degenning. And anyway, like I picked that community because you like went in there, you felt the vibes, you could feel it was strong. And so kind of like use that as a jumping off point. And then I basically took it upon myself to like be an educator, because that's actually how I learn. And I think it's like when you're like, how should I approach Bitcoin? It's like figure out how you learn best and do that thing. For some people, it's like having conversations. I don't like saying things unless I feel like I have like 5 levels of understanding to back up what I'm going to say. Some people are really good at just like walking up to you and being like, Aaron, tell me about this.
Yeah.
And you will like, and I will ask the dumbest questions, but I will
love
walk
people
away.
like that, by the way.
Yeah.
I love people who are just like, no.
How would you say I learned? I think I learned through asking you dumb questions.
That's true, although I just wouldn't say they're dumb questions.
Thank
I just
you.
like people who
That's
ask
so
a lot of
nice.
questions.
Well, but that's what How Money Podcast is, right?
That's right.
It's like, it's literally just like you are like a well of information. And I'm like, so do lawyers write smart contracts? You know, like that's like, and I think the way I learn is like what you're saying, it's conversational, but it's also, I love being entertained as I learn. And so that was kind of the idea with How Money, that like, that's why I wanted to do How Money, is that like, you know, most of Bitcoin
This
education
is so
is
female. Entertain me while I learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Men don't expect to be entertained while they learn.
They're just like, I want to suffer through a 1-hour Bitcoin education podcast. It's like, no, like you want to laugh, you want to like have a good time. And like, ideally you like pick up some stuff on the way, but you're just watching because it's fun for you. And I think actually that is like what makes NFTs valuable or gives them utility, is that like, it's fun to participate in,
it's like,
in
hey,
NFT
the first
culture.
thing you can do with this is look at like a funny picture.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, hey, the first thing you can do with this is read about what a ZK rollup is.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's like if you
absolutely
can
not.
entertain people while you educate them. That's the way that I learn. I like learning through like being entertained, which for me can also be conversation.
Yeah.
But so you learn through
So
teaching.
I learned through teaching, and so I kind of took it upon myself. Like I joined OMB really early, and I was like, I want to store this somewhere safe. How do I
Good
do
luck.
this? Right. And so I went and I like read all the Sparrow documentation and wrote up a guide on like, okay, this is how Sparrow works. And in order to do that, I had to learn about UTXOs. And it was like before this, you know, I like knew what the acronym UTXO was, but I don't think I properly understood like what the UTXO model meant. And I definitely didn't understand how ordinals and inscriptions work until I went and, you know, someone was like, how do I use Sparrow? And I was like, well, let me go figure this out. Cause like, I want to know too. But
Sparrow is so good.
It's
Sparrow
amazing.
is so good.
Yeah, like-
we did a 15 sat ad read.
yeah, not 15 cents,
No,
15 sat.
15 sat ad read for Sparrow, which I don't regret at all. It's like, and I've been doing more.
who did you get to
No, it
process
was
the transaction
decentral-
under
it
the
was
dust
a- it was a
limit? Did you pass it to
decentralized,
Marathon and you're like,
we
give me the 15
we,
sats?
We had like I think we were on Fountain, which is like this like Bitcoin.
No, it wasn't Found. It was. Didn't you do it on what's the thing that's like Reddit, but Hacker News?
Hacker News, yeah, that's
Yes.
right. Yeah, so I posted on Hacker News. I was like, "Hey, we're going to do an ad read on How Many Pod. Whoever like zaps a comment with the most sats or whatever can tell us what to do an
okay.
ad read."
So we got
Yeah.
15
And the winner
zaps.
was like 15 sats
Yeah,
to do an
okay.
ad read for Sparrow.
And what's so funny
Nice.
is that ad read is on the original Ordinals episode. It's
Oh, yeah,
it's
that's
on
right,
our
yeah.
most viewed episode.
right, yeah.
The only ad read we've ever done,
Yeah.
and Casey sold us for 15 cents.
Yeah, but I regret nothing. Like I've been doing more like, you know, sat and inscription like degeneracy in the last few weeks, and using Sparrow is
Oh,
like
why
part
have
of
you
my
been
workful.
doing sat degeneracy,
Who
Casey?
can say? And that's very mysterious.
Oh, interesting. Alpha. Okay.
Alpha, little alpha drop, little alpha, beta, gamma drop. And it's like, it's fabulous. It's great.
Yeah.
It's really good. Craig Raw is like super smart. He's super thoughtful about how he designs things. Like I remember going into like the wallet import, wallet export field. And it's like, oh, you can import anything.
Yeah.
You can import and export in like any format,
Right.
which is sick.
Yeah, it is nice.
Yeah.
It is nice. But okay, so you learned like
So yeah, I like learned Sparrow, and then I started part-time with the Taproot Wizards in June. And one of the first questions I asked Udi was like, I want to understand Bitcoin at a technical level, because I'd started to understand ordinals, but like ordinals and Bitcoin are somewhat orthogonal. Right?
ordinals is a hallucination
it's
on
like
top of
built
Bitcoin.
completely on top of it. It's totally separate. Like
That's what makes the design like work, is that it's
Right.
orthogonal. And like also like, you know, for example, people are always like proposing things to ordinals and proposing things for runes and inscriptions and stuff where they're like, hey, why don't you let me put a public key somewhere and then verify that some signature was made with that public key? And I have to like sort of explain, I think that's very natural for people to want.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. Actually, the whole point of ordinals and inscriptions is that Ord doesn't have to do any of that.
Right.
Ord just gets a transaction from Bitcoin, uses that as evidence that it was accepted and that it was valid, and then looks at everything in the transaction but the script. I mean, except to extract the inscription data, right? And then it can go like so. Ord doesn't do any signature validation.
Right.
Bitcoin does signature
Right.
validation. Ordinal just it's like it's like it's sort of the receipt idea that Bitcoin transactions should be not do things but be evidence that something was done.
Right.
Right. And it's the same thing with ordinals. Like getting a Bitcoin transaction into Ord is like evidence that this transaction happens.
Right.
And Ord just kind of notates the result. It doesn't do anything or execute anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So I asked Udi this. He's like, I read Programming Bitcoin. I think you should read that. I recommend it to anyone who has a little bit of programming skills. Like if you know Python, it's worth doing, and you know like basic math. It's a challenge to get through, but it's very rewarding to get through, because what you do is you write the Bitcoin protocol from scratch.
Oh, in
Python.
Yeah, nice.
And so it literally like chapter 1 is literally like modular arithmetic. Chapter 2 is like elliptic curves. You know, chapter 3 is like, okay, finite fields over elliptic curve, like over elliptic curve. Chapter 4 is like, how do you do a basic signature? And you basically build up from the basic building blocks. And so for me, as someone who really feels like they have to understand the mechanisms behind things and understand how things work, it was the perfect book, because after finishing it, you're like, okay, I have a very deep understanding now of how Bitcoin works.
Like the
from
backbone
the
of-
backbone of
yeah.
Bitcoin from like a theoretical perspective, but I've also been forced to like slog through some of this and actually put the code down. And you know, there's like there's learning it as you reading it, but then when you actually are forced to do it, it like, you know, it like presses that stamp down further in your brain to where you're like, okay, now I get it. And so like through that book, I was like, okay, now I like understand Bitcoin at like another level. I think everyone can always understand Bitcoin at a level deeper. Like there's always something else there. As I like,
Bitcoin is infinite.
At the base level is the it's the Genesis block natal chart, astrological interpretation.
True, true.
Bitcoin is the digital megalith of the age of Aquarius. That's sort of like the underlying thing.
Yeah.
And then Satoshi's sort of built on top of that.
Right.
You know.
yeah.
Sorry to derail. Okay, so
like,
now what do you do for Taproot Wizards? Like
What don't you do for Taproot Wizards?
That's a better question, Casey. Everyone else just fucks around on Twitter, and I do all the work in the background.
Right.
Yeah,
with
that's
Rindal.
how
It's
I
like
imagine.
Rindal and Tyler back here doing the work. Udi and Eric.
Udi's just
you know.
tweeting, going, "Bitcoiners should not be podcasters; they should write code." Meanwhile, Udi, the only thing he writes is tweets. sorry. I bet he'll watch, right? Because it's a Taproot Wizards episode.
Yeah, he's gonna be forced to watch.
Yeah.
so,
Okay. So you know,
nice.
get that dig
What's
in.
up, Udi?
Yeah, get your digs in now.
Yeah. I will.
But yeah, I think it's interesting. Like my job has really changed over the course of being there. So, but a lot of it does center around like what I would call our products, and our products have kind of changed over time.
Yeah, what are your products?
Like it was.
when are the wizards gonna be inscribed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to know when the wizards are coming. I would love to know when my wizard is going to my wallet.
That you should be asking that question.
Yeah. It's actually one of those things that's better. It's like one of those things where if Udi loses it, then it's not my fault.
Right, of course.
Now, like, he owes me a new wizard, but if I lose it, then like
it's so
that's
over.
really bad. So it's like I trust Udi enough. Like self-sovereignty seems cool, but not having to hold that asset also seems
totally.
cool.
Absolutely.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of jumped from product to product, right? I think when I joined, we had started talking about ZK rollups on Bitcoin, like going back to like, I wrote this piece. Eric was like, oh, you like kind of took our thoughts and put them down on paper. As we grew and evolved, I think we kind of realized like Bitcoin isn't in a spot right now to be ready for like what we think the good roll up for Bitcoin is. And so, we were doing these missions, we were doing quests. We were looking into like various other opcodes and what could actually help Bitcoin. Cause I think like that is really important to us. Everyone at the Taproot Wizards very much cares deeply about Bitcoin and kind of like doing what we think is right for Bitcoin. So we were looking into like vaults with James O.B., who wrote the amazing BIP for OpVault. And then we stumbled upon Cat actually at the Stanford conference.
Oh, really?
When we met you all last fall, kind of as a joke. Like we were talking with Sam Parker, who's deep in those weeds, and he's like, "I think someone's gonna do like a ZK proof with opcat," and I was like, "Nah,
nah, bro.
Like we'll see."
I literally, and this is where, again, off pod, we were having a conversation where I was like, I don't think that people realize that Taproot Wizards is doing anything except just being an NFT project. And you were like, really? I think people must know that. But I literally thought that you guys were doing the whole opcat thing because of Luke Deshier's cat eating tweets.
Oh, really?
I literally thought that it was like the
marketing machine is working.
Yeah, that was like a huge trolling effort that had just like that you were like, oh, Luke eats cats and Udi has a feud with Luke. So then we found opcat, which it just is an opcode, whatever. Yeah. And then we're just gonna like throw that in his face so that he never has to he can never forget that he like said eating cats was okay. And then I literally thought you made an entire collection around that. That's what I was like, damn, like Udi's hurt. Like that was like my interpretation. So like I think it's interesting, like, most NFT projects or crypto projects, they go like utility first. They say like there's so much utility here, and yeah, we do have a token or we do have an NFT, but it's not about that. It's about the utility. Whereas Taproot Wizards is kind of the opposite, where it's like meme NFT first, and then in the background there's sort of like this nebulous kind of like product development thing that's happening.
This is the inversion of power in all of ordinals. It's that like everything is like they're just this memes at the bottom. Yeah. And then the serious adult products are growing out of the, matrix, the nutrient matrix of the memes. Right? As opposed to other chains, which are like, we've got these serious adult projects, and then the memes are on top. It's like, no, ordinals, the memes are at the very core.
It's meme-driven development.
It's meme-driven development, indeed.
Exactly. Like you force people to learn about opcat because they want the quantum cat whitelist spot. Like that's, exactly. It's like, I think like once that actually clicked for me, that's what you guys are doing, which it took an embarrassingly long amount of time. But actually, to the viewer, like, did you know? Because I didn't know. I literally thought it was just a whole troll.
Same. I think maybe I found out about it like before.
Because of me, probably. I think I told you.
Yeah. Like, it took me a while to figure out.
I literally just thought like you guys were just trolling like this whole time basically until relatively recently. But I mean, you kind of are just trolling like to some extent. Like
what you said is 110% true, which is let me give you two options from like a product mind. What would you want to put in front of someone? A like cute, fun quantum cat that Far cooked up that looks interesting and enjoyable, or white paper on why opcat might
Right.
enable better roll-up architecture on
Right.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like 3 people want to do this, and clearly at least 3,000 people wanted a quantum cat.
Right.
And so I think like that is very much within our ethos of like, I know Aaron, you're like, you all are psyopsing people into
You're psyoping
doing
people into
things.
learning about Bitcoin.
Like probably like guilty as charged, right? Like, yeah, we are to some degree psyopsing people into learning about Bitcoin, but like something I appreciate spending a bunch of time really close to our community is that they seem to really enjoy it. They're
Yeah.
like, I love being here because, you know, every week I come away knowing something different about Bitcoin, being like more enamored with it because I found out X or Y. Like I know what a UTXO is now. I know, you know, whatever it is, the flavor of the week, what a PSBT is. I've learned how you can actually replace, you know, outputs of a PSBT, and this is why transactions are being sniped from the mempool.
Yeah.
And like, I see that happening, but I didn't have any way to learn about that. But when I come to the Taproot Wizards Discord, like there are people there that will joke and put a bunch of cat and wizard memes, but also who are deeply knowledgeable and will spend the time to explain these things. And I think that's like where we found our sweet spot.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is like, it's again what I was saying about like entertainment as education is like, I think, you know, there's a lot of mentality within kind of OG Bitcoiners or Bitcoin maxis, whatever group you want to call them, like where they have this kind of like, if you build it, they will come mentality
Right.
where they're like, I don't need to try to like, and I think a lot of it does come from this kind of like Satoshi as God or like Satoshi as like Bitcoin as being perfect money kind of narrative, because that's what happened with Bitcoin, right? It's like Satoshi just sort of like put out the white paper, like wrote something,
Yeah.
just threw it out there, you know, wrote some like posts on the Bitcoin Talk forum and whatever. And then, and if you look at, you know, I think I often see Bitcoiners like quote Satoshi in this way where it's like, if you don't get it, I don't have time to explain it to you type of thing, right? It's like, and I think because they have Bitcoin as the ultimate ideal, they think, okay, well, I don't need to do anything different than what Bitcoin did because Bitcoin did this and it's perfect. And it's, why would I want to be anything but Bitcoin?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, okay, but you know, why does any shitcoin like end up getting way more attention than Bitcoin? It's because guess what? They have a marketing team.
Yeah.
Like they pay people to do marketing.
Yep.
They pay people to go out and spread the word about something. Whereas Bitcoin is something that you kind of just have to like be infected by the mind virus in some sort of weird way. And I think like that's a key point that so many people in Bitcoin are missing is that like, if you make it fun, if you try to get people to care about it, shocker, they're going to care about it a lot more than if you don't put any effort into getting them to care about it. I guess going back to sort of the BIP land of it all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that relates, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, you know, how do you make a change to Bitcoin? How do you get things to happen on Bitcoin? Like, you know, essentially what you guys are doing with opcat is like a totally different way of trying to make a change to Bitcoin than anyone's ever done. Right.
Yeah. And I think like we were somewhat inspired by like the UASF hats from the Segwit era, where it was like during the Segwit soft fork, you could like signal that you were like of this camp by wearing the UASF hat.
That's so funny.
And it's like, you know, well, can you make an ordinal collection that says like, hey, I'm in support of this thing? Right? Like we had the physical version and now we have ordinals. So, you know, can we use this as a mechanism to let people say like, hey, this is something I'm interested in. I hear what people are saying about opcat and the things that they're telling me we can do, like vaults, like actual secure bridges, seem interesting. And so yeah, I want to wear a cat because I also agree with those things and I want to learn more about those things.
Yeah.
And so as we were crafting the Quantum Cats collection, we knew that it was going to be, you know, focused around opcat. And so from the product side, it was like we came up with this idea of evolutions. Like shout out Rindall, who on his first day at the Taproot Wizards was like, "Hey, I figured out how to make evolving ordinals," and we're all just like,
Nice.
"What?" And we kind of realized like, oh, this is a really cool mechanism to use if you're going to try and follow the path of, you know, a BIP along this thing. And so as we were designing the entire Quantum Cats, you know, product and around it, one of the things we wanted to do was have a website where you could basically, you know, see how your cat had evolved or somehow see how it was related to the progress of the actual opcat BIP.
Yep.
And so I had started making that, and at first it was, you know, just going to be like 3 stages, you know, like, okay, here's what's going to happen. And that's really when I got like really started going down the rabbit hole.
How was it? Like, what expectations did you have about what a BIP was and how it worked, and how is it different from when you actually started digging into it?
I think in this case, I was really blessed by not knowing anything. Like I was basically an outsider coming in and just being told like, hey, there's this thing called BIPs and they happen.
BIPs happen, right.
No one knows how.
No one knows how.
No one knows why.
And so, I put on my like little researcher hat and I was like, all right, great. Like, let's go talk to some people. So, you know, I was like, okay, you know, Eric, tell me how you think BIPs happen. And I like literally, we had a 3-hour conversation and I wrote everything down. I was like, okay, Rindall, tell me how you think BIPs happen. Write everything down. Like Udi, Paul Stortz has actually had some very good thoughts.
Paul
on
Stortz
this.
has many thoughts.
Yeah,
I like Paul a lot. I think Paul is fucking hilarious. Yeah, I'm a Paul fan. Even though I'm not really a Drive Chain fan, but I'm a Paul fan.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
separate the art from the artist.
That's right. Yeah,
And you
exactly.
love the artist.
I love the artist. Yeah.
Similarly, I've like had really good conversations with Paul, and so basically just went around and started talking to a bunch of longtime Bitcoiners how they thought this happened, and so over, you know. At first I was like, okay, you know, maybe we'll have a few steps along the process. And over time it like starts to congeal for me that no one knows exactly how this works, but there are certain things that definitely do have to happen. And so I had gotten an iPad, funnily enough, to start doing technically Bitcoin with Jan, because I was like, I need to draw a UTXO so I can explain to people what this looks like. And I was like, oh, I got this like iPad. And so it starts like turning into this thing. And I was like, you know what? I want to make this like Candyland. Like this is how to express this thing. Because as I was talking to the people, the number one thing that came up over and over again was BIPs do not succeed. Like they don't happen, but there's like, you know, by a miracle of God, occasionally they do. But like by and large, they don't happen. And so it starts to like click for me, and that's where all the flavor text of like flip a coin in Bipland comes from. Is I was like, oh, like this is funny because it's like Candyland. You know, you're at Queen Frostine, and then you draw like
that's,
you know,
a name I haven't heard in a long time.
You draw like the candy cane guy who's back at the start, and then you're like, okay, great, like start all over. So these spots kept emerging. Like, okay, I get it. You have to send something out to the dev mailing list. Like that's the first thing. But then after that, what happens? And I start looking into it, and it's like, well, bike shedding happens. Like you basically, unless everyone agrees on this thing already, your thing gets bike shedded to hell. And because the default is always Bitcoin shouldn't change, which I agree with. But like there doesn't seem to be any productive discussion these days in the Bitcoin, you know, organization about how things should happen. And so what I started to see was like a history of Bitcoin starting as this small organization where like all the stakeholders are kind of the same people. Like the miners are the node runners, are the devs. And then over time you see it break off.
Well, and one really interesting thing to talk about the prehistory of Bitcoin. I mean, not the prehistory, but the early history of Bitcoin is that soft forks and hard forks just used to kind of happen. Right? Like, I mean, Satoshi would I don't know how many times, but many times Satoshi would change the code in ways that were soft forks or were technically hard forks, even though the chain like never actually ran into a condition where it would split. And he would just do it. He just put it in the code and it just happened. And then also after that period, there was another period where soft forks were done, in this later period, development had shifted to GitHub. There was a small but active developer community, and soft forks would happen without much rancor or whatever. Like, things like, you have to include the block height in a block to make sure that Coinbase transaction IDs are all different.
Right.
That was something that went in without much fanfare. One early one, which was like in some ways kind of controversial, was the pay to script hash construction. And a lot of people now think pay to script hash is before in Bitcoin, I don't even remember how this would work, but we didn't have pay to script hash. We didn't have a way of saying, I want to pay this script and I don't care what it is, but I just give me the hash of the script, commit to the hash of the script. We didn't have that. That was a soft fork. There was a number of other soft forks, I think like 4 or 5 maybe.
Yeah.
And those happened very quietly. The devs just kind of talked about it on GitHub and then they did it. And I don't think there was ever much controversy. Even the controversy around pay to script hash is like, I think Gavin wanted something called op eval that turned out to be like a bad idea and people proposed pay to script hash. And I actually believe back then Luke had a suggestion for an alternative to pay to script hash that these days people widely acknowledge as being superior than the old pay to script hash. But so there's this prehistory of like Satoshi just unilaterally made all these changes.
Yeah.
Then there was this period where the devs made changes and it was pretty fine.
Right.
And then which was the first? Was Segwit like the first like controversial soft fork?
Segwit was definitely the controversial soft fork.
Yeah.
It's like, was there some controversy in the earlier ones? Like, yeah, but then
it was like devs grousing on Bitcoin on GitHub. That was the controversy.
But things got done. There was never. It feels like there was never this schism that felt so broken, where it was like you were on one side, you were either a large blocker or a small blocker, and like you will be damned if you try and be in the middle or not be one of these things. I think that's really when Segwit happened, and when we talk about those like important pieces of the Bitcoin organization, right, you have to realize that of course, in the early days, Bitcoin was worth nothing. So who cares if Satoshi just pushes a change? Also, like, Satoshi made it. Of course, he knows what to do. And then it's like, we've gained a little value, but like, we trust the devs. It's still like a close, tight-knit community. But it feels like around the time of Segwit, now we have like miners that are actual like mining operations that have their own interests that may be slightly different from those of the devs. And now people are holding Bitcoin and it is more valuable. And so you see like a breaking apart of these stakeholders into camps that have slightly different interests.
It also, I think that was also the time where people started being, let's say, strategic with their arguments in the sense of not making arguments that were, hey, this is what I want to happen and this is why it should happen, like a straightforward, like, this is what I believe, here's an explanation of what I believe. By strategic behavior, what I mean is thinking, okay, what's the outcome that I want to have happen? And let me give the argument that I think is going to make that happen, which is unrelated to the truth or what I actually believe, right? Like, it's like, I'm running for an office. I'm running for office. I think that I would be a better candidate, or I want to be elected to this office. And so instead of just saying like, hey, I think my opponent is bad because he has these beliefs or whatever, I say, no, my opponent is a dog rapist, and like that is like, he's not actually a dog rapist. Maybe he is, whatever. But like, not whatever. That's not okay at all. But like, but I'm not going to, give an argument based on what I believe. I'm going to give, a facetious argument based on what I think is going to achieve the outcome that I want.
But I think that's also a product of like the stakeholders starting to become different groups of people that have different desires, right? It's like when you just have the same group of people that largely like come from the same background or same route into Bitcoin. It's like you can appeal through an argument that appeals to that group.
Yeah, you convince the in-group, you demonize the out-group, right?
Right. It's just like when you have to appeal to a wider audience, then you have to do things like have a quantum cat. And, you know what I mean? Like, it's like you got to do some crazy ass shit to get your message across. So I didn't know that Segwit was like the first controversial.
I think
Soft
so.
fork.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what happened before Segwit. I can't think of what was the most consequential soft fork before Segwit.
It's funny because
was it pay to script
yeah, it's like
hash?
pay to script. There's a lot of small soft forks. There was like what is it, CSV?
Check sequence verify.
yeah,
Sure,
yeah.
yeah. There was the end lock time, like
Yeah, yeah.
repurposing end sequence to be a relative lock time.
Right, but like all these things felt relatively small, and to be fair, like I didn't spend a ton of time investigating the pre-Segwit days, other than to hear that like they felt like halcyon times relative to
Right. It's like how like there's
post-Segwit.
like hundreds of thousands of years of human history, and you're just like, well, but they were just kind of roaming around hunter gatherers.
and now we have nuclear bombs. So yeah, Segwit was definitely like, if you stacked up all the controversy pre-Segwit, it dwarfs in comparison to what Segwit brought.
Yeah, Segwit was also like, it was like a block size increase, and it also sort of had like a desire for a block size increase has all these different like parameters. It's really easy to argue about and have all these different kind of opinions on how to do it. Like, yeah.
But I think what you said is right, is we saw some degree of like politicization of Bitcoin during this time. Like the one of the things I kind of poke fun at in BIPland is the covert ASICs boost.
Oh yeah, right.
And this was like something miners had discovered that like might let them mine faster than other people, and if a certain soft fork happened, it was going to be good for the miners, but they didn't want to talk about that.
Well, I think wasn't it the opposite, that that Segwit would have made covert ASIC boost very hard.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So they wanted anything but Segwit.
Yeah. And so you have things like that where people are discovering things that aren't being brought up, right? It's not like everyone is no longer bringing all the facts to the table, and we're going to have an unbiased discussion as to like what the best outcome is, because, well, now the best outcome depends on like which one of these camps you fall in. So it feels like Segwit was definitely a big breaking point in Bitcoin, and I think it left a lot of emotional baggage. Like, this is
That
why
much is very clear to me. Yes.
Yeah.
This is what I always say. PTSD from the war.
Yeah, that's why in BIPland, when you fly to Activation Island, that you first go to the Segwit baggage claim. And you flip a coin to find out if you're taking your Segwit baggage with you. And then that determines how you interact with the miners later. Like,
nice.
should
That's sick.
So then, yeah, if you end up doing like BIP 8 lot equals false, you have to like go to the miners, and then you flip a coin, and like if it's heads, your baggage has a free energy source, and the miners are happy. But if it's tails, your baggage contains covert ASICs boost patent applications, and so then the miners are pissed off and they kill your BIP and you have to start again, right? And these are the things that I kind of learned as I was researching the BIP process, where it's like it's not just here, let me give you the steps that you must follow, and if you do this, your change is going to be approved in Bitcoin. And I actually think that's not a bad thing, right? I think Bitcoin shouldn't be like ambiguously uneasy to change. Like it should not, you shouldn't just walk up to Bitcoin and be like, bam, here's my BIP. Like,
that's part of what makes it valuable.
Like there does need to be some level of resistance for it to maintain its, decentralized property. But there's a difference between being like hard and ambiguous and inefficient. And that's like bringing it all the way back to like, what are BIP numbers? Like BIP numbers are just inefficient. Like they are unnecessarily inefficient, like roadblocks that are places where people get to aggregate power for, reasons of organizational inertia.
The BIP and the BIP numbering scheme is just fucking insane. Like whenever I want to look at a BIP, like, okay, so the BIP numbers are hypothetically sort of divided into like topic areas, right? So that like, I don't know, like the 8s and the 9s are like soft fork activation conditions, and the 300s are like Taproot or something, and like
Yeah.
Drive Chain is like who knows where, and and Luke is like, you know, the master of the system, and Luke is like, oh, I'll give you a BIP number according to my weird like Dewey Decimal System like organization.
Yeah.
And that's part of why Luke has power, and it's true. It's so dumb, but it's true. Like,
Yeah.
Kale Wolf was a BIP editor. He
Right.
stepped down because he was largely ineffective. And one of the reasons was like, okay, he can't just pick a number, right? Like
Yeah.
it's all according to Luke's weird ass like thing. And so Luke can just roadblock things indefinitely.
Yeah.
And it's like, zoom out, like that's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Like you can't get a number for this fucking thing. So like this critical thing gets roadblocked. Like it's fucking crazy.
But it's class. I mean, it's like, I think, you know, like we're recreating like the bureaucracy of
Yeah.
government, you know, it's like there's so many things like that in government, in a formal governance structure.
It's strange that Luke is a Catholic because goddamn, he is Byzantine.
That's a good one.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Good work.
I had to stew on that for a second before it came out, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't even know what my next question is. Like we're kind of just like spinning off about BIPs. I mean, I guess
So like, what are the steps of a BIP? So like, okay, what's the ideal state of a BIP? Is like I have an idea, and
Yeah.
then I post it to a Bitcoin mailing list, and
Right.
there's some discussion,
Right.
and then I write it up in a document, right? And that document is called a BIP,
Right.
And I open a PR on github.com/bitcoin/bips,
Yep.
and then the BIP editor reviews it for style and just gatekeeps it based on like, is this related to Bitcoin or is this
Yeah.
completely different? And if the style is okay and the spelling is okay, the BIP editor says okay and gives it a BIP number and then merges it into the repo. And the purpose of a BIP number is to identify the document among all these other documents: BIP1, BIP2, BIP3, BIP whatever.
Right.
And then
In theory.
in theory, yeah. And then for some BIPs, that's the end.
Right.
Right? Like, so for the Ordinals BIP, the point of the Ordinals BIP is to explain to people what already happened, to provide a kind of technical documentation that people can refer to. It's not like once the Ordinals BIP is accepted, Bitcoin Core will implement it. It's
Right.
not like any particular thing will happen.
Right.
Some BIPs, like now let's take a BIP that involves like a consensus change to Bitcoin.
Right.
After the BIP is accepted, then actually that's when the consensus process
Right.
begins, right? That's when people decide kind of what they feel about the BIP. And so like, then we have this like fuzzy consensus process. At the end of the day, either it looks like, you know, it's not going to happen, or it looks like it is going to happen. And then people start working on like concretely making that happen. And
Right.
a change to Bitcoin Core to consensus would involve like writing the implementation for Bitcoin Core,
Right.
figuring out how to activate it, and then activating it. And then the BIP serves as this documentation of the consensus changes that were made in the past.
Right.
Right. But every step of that process is like fraught and weird and fuzzy and nobody understands it.
Right. Yeah.
There's also something
Could not agree more.
He like see, I ask a question and I'm asking a question. He asks a question and he's just talking.
so, and then like, I think a very weird thing that's happened in Bitcoin, and I kind of understand why it's happened, is that a lot of the people who used to have the political influence
Yeah.
to get changes made
Right.
are now no longer interested in doing that.
Yeah.
You know? And so just to be really specific, and I don't think these people would mind me saying this, I think this is a pretty, you know, reasonable observation. Like, you know, for example, people like Peter Willa, who
Yeah.
was instrumental in getting Segwit done and getting it activated. And in fact, also instrumental in like Taproot.
Right.
He is very well thought of, you know, and people have a lot of respect for him. He's sort of like a Bitcoin OG. He also is a excellent developer and an excellent Bitcoin Core developer.
Right.
And so he can make changes. He can, you know, propose changes. He can open PRs on Bitcoin Core that are probably going to get merged, both because he's smart and he writes good code, but also he understands the process. He knows the people involved. And so he, and I don't know who else I would sort of describe. I mean, there's like Peter Willa,
Like Greg Maxwell, if he did something, would like get the same level of.
yeah. Greg Maxwell. So there's those people who are like very instrumental in these things. And then there's also sort of like Bitcoin thought leaders, you know, like Adam Back comes to mind. And I think that Peter Willa and Greg Maxwell are not really interested in doing that. And I think part of it is that they're uncomfortable with that element. They don't think that they should be able to unilaterally make changes to Bitcoin or be, the forcing factor that gets something done. And in fact, I also think that Bitcoin Core, like as sort of like an org and a project, they don't want to make a change to Bitcoin Core that then becomes what is done on the Bitcoin network.
Right.
They want, and they don't view Core, and by Core I'm saying like github.com/Bitcoin/Bitcoin.
Right.
They don't view Core as a consensus building organization.
Right.
They want the community to come to consensus, and then Bitcoin Core to implement what the community wants.
Right.
I actually think the ideal upgrade, according to Bitcoin Core's sort of like ethos, is that changes are proposed through this like BIP process, and then maybe even somebody else writes the implementation, and there's like a fork of Bitcoin Core
100%.
that activates the change, and then Bitcoin Core is like, okay, well now this is active, now Core will implement it and merge it. And I think that is a great ideal. I don't think that anything can happen that way. I think that we've created a situation where it is impossible to progress because of an idealized vision of how things should be. But the reality is that the vast majority of participants in Bitcoin, they just download newly released versions of Bitcoin Core.
Yeah.
And without Core making a change, nothing will happen.
Yeah. I think if you ask Core, they're like, yeah, we want nothing to do with this process, as you said.
Yeah.
And that's different than in the past, where you did have like the Peters of the world who had the keys to the castle, also being the person who is helping write the Taproot implementation. And now we have a new set of, core maintainers who don't have, that long storied history, or at least all of them don't. And they don't have that same political, they don't have that same reputational power to go out and say, this is what I think should happen and why. And that can also be like separated from them as, Bitcoin Core maintainer. Whereas like people trust like that if Peter Willis said something, he's like, he's not saying it because this is what he wants to happen in Bitcoin. He like believes this is the best thing for Bitcoin, and like we trust him. Whereas with this new group of, Bitcoin Core maintainers, it's like, okay, well, they're younger and they haven't had to go through this before. And if I were them, I'd be like, well, let me look at this. I can either like do the risky thing and potentially merge in something that may screw up Bitcoin, or I can just keep doing my job, keep making the non-consensus changes, and Bitcoin is a $1.1 trillion asset that seems to continue to grow. So like, is anything really wrong?
Yeah.
And so it actually, when you realize that it is now more incumbent on the rest of the community to make it abundantly clear to this new group that this change is what everyone wants. It is a consensus change. Like there is rough consensus amongst the community, and don't make it a hard choice for them as to whether they should ultimately like hit the merge button or like bring this thing in.
But how do you decide that the community has consensus around something? Is it that Udi posts a Twitter poll and says, do you want this, yes or no? And then you look at that and say, well, 87% said yes on the Twitter poll. I feel like consensus, it's like, what is consensus? Is it literally just Twitter engagement? Is it the Bitcoin Core maintainers algorithmic feed that gets delivered to them? Do you know? How do you decide that?
And I think that's I tried to kind of poke fun at this in BIPland, and I know you all had Jeremy on the pod, and his story like really resonates here because he is like a knight in shining armor who ran through the BIPland process and was ultimately like stabbed in the back.
Slayed by the dragon.
Slayed by the dragon that is Blockstream for political reasons of things that they didn't like at the end, even though he did everything that everyone said should happen, right? He posted to the mailing list, and then he, wrote the implementation, and then he had a bunch of people talk about it. And then they're like, well, you need to show us that people want to use CTV. Okay, great. I'm going to write a bunch of apps and show you that like, hey, CTV works in these implementations. And I was like, well, let's move the goalposts some more. Like, that's not good enough. Like, you also need to show us that like the big economic actors care about this and want this. So then he gets everyone to sign up. And there's a list of like the 50 names. And then like, you know, at the very end, he goes through all of these hoops. He does everything everyone's told him. And you know, you can like decide how you think this happened, but it's like at the end of the day, the Blockstream guys are like, yeah, we don't like this. Like, we're going to character assassinate you and like kill this BIP because you said we could do a speedy trial and like you're an attack on Bitcoin.
And also like the idea that proposing, like ultimately writing an implementation that people can use that activates a change on the Bitcoin network is a proposal.
Right.
And characterizing writing a soft fork client as a hostile act.
Yeah.
It's like fucking stupid. It's like, oh no, you didn't check all these fucking boxes before you offer people the choice to activate this.
Yeah.
But this goes back to exactly what, you know, I just asked in terms of like, how do you determine consensus, where it's like, you know, I think, and it also goes back to, like what you were saying earlier about like Segwit being this first like politicized narrative version of an argument where it's like you're not just saying this is why I want this thing, like here's my logical argument. You're kind of like making like a PR argument or something like that. I think like, you know, if consensus is like defined by just what you see on Twitter, which it seems like that's kind of the way people think of it, or who you talk to at a Bitcoin conference or what your favorite Bitcoin influencer says, then ultimately like, yeah, Bitcoin Twitter is a bunch of like complete idiots that just like go along with an angry, aggressive argument. And so that's going to be the argument that you make is like a character assassination rather than like a logical argument, because that's what you're seeing in terms of what determines consensus. Right. But like, is Bitcoin Twitter? No. Yeah. Like I don't I don't understand how like Twitter is essentially the proxy for Bitcoin consensus when there's so many people in theory that use Bitcoin that aren't on Twitter, or at least aren't on Twitter in this like specific niche of weirdos.
I think to understand that we have to go back and talk about the stakeholders who are involved here in the upgrade. So when you actually say, is it consensus? It's funny, like Bitcoin for being so libertarian is hilariously anti like, hey, I'm going to put out an activation client that says I want CTV or I want CAT. Like if we did that tomorrow, like Udi would probably be murdered. Like people would be like,
Mossad agent confirmed.
Mossad agent, like this is a real attack on Bitcoin. Like you put out an activation client, which is like completely within the realm of something you should be able to do.
How do you determine if there's consensus without an activation client?
You can't.
You look at your Twitter feed and you see what Michael Saylor is saying, and you see what Saifedean says and Jimmy Saw. Like that's what I mean. It's like that's not consensus. It's just like algorithm Twitter feed opinions.
Yeah, and I think part of this comes back to how we actually do activation of these changes. So there's the whole posturing that happens of just like getting the BIP to the point where it's like devs agree that this code is not buggy. Like this is not going to introduce some crazy bug into Bitcoin. And then we go to actually activate it.
So that's kind of like dev level
this
consensus.
Is like dev level consensus, like, you know, maybe the community, ideally the community has actually used things that this change is going to allow and said like, hey, I want this thing, right? Like I want covenants, so please give me CTV, which I want covenants, please give me CTV. But then after that, we have to actually get it onto like the Bitcoin network and say like Bitcoin is running, you know, the version that has CTV. Like 51% of the network agrees that this is true. And the going way we do that seems to be to first go to miners and we say, hey miners, would you activate this for us please? Because we want covenants. Okay, I'm a miner. What do I do? Well, I'm a public company with public shareholders.
Well, first of all, if you're a miner, you don't know fucking anything.
Yes.
You like wake up in the morning, you go to your big fucking factory filled with toasters. You make sure that all the toasters have like a blinking green light on them. And if any of those toasters have like a red light on them, you fucking rip them out from the wall. You put in a new toaster. And that's like your day. And that's what miners should do.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's also what miners do. And they don't understand anything. They don't understand fucking anything.
I explained to a like miner that definitely should know. I explained what an ordinal was at Ord Denver. It was pretty insane. They were like, after all this time, I still don't even know what an ordinal is. I was like, oh no, well, like, let me explain it to you. It took me 30 seconds, and they were like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then like went about their like fucking miner, like high up miner duty. I was like, Godspeed to the backbone of our network here.
Right, yeah.
Have you heard of MEV?
Don't tell them.
But yeah, it's like miners' job is to find cheap energy and run a hardware operation.
Yeah.
But they don't understand, and it's not really their job to figure out like what the implication of CTV or opcat or whatever the newest soft fork is coming in. And so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to go say, hey, like, Sailor, what do you think about this? Like, who are my friends? I'm going to go ask them what they think about it because it's not my job to understand
And
it.
then Michael Saylor is going to say, well, Bitcoin is a digital battery, and you could literally take the cyber hornets.
But like, this is where that Twitter consensus actually comes into play.
Yeah.
Like, because now all of a sudden, okay, I'm a miner. I have public shareholders. If everyone on Twitter is yelling that like CTV is an attack on Bitcoin, and I have to go to a board meeting next month and explain to my shareholders why I like did this thing to support this thing that everyone in the public seems to hate.
Yeah.
And now like people are moving their like, they're leaving our pool, like whatever, like that's not good for me. Like, I don't want to do that. And so, but in our BIP process, the first thing we do is we go say in activation, we say, hey miners, will you do this for us?
Yeah.
And the miners' incentive is just it's not to understand this BIP. It's not to go and figure out whether they should do this, but that's the first thing we do.
I guess it's one reason is that's good. One thing that is good to touch on is why we do this.
Yeah.
And the reason we go to miners is not to ask for their approval. It is because if you are doing a soft fork, old clients, unupgraded clients are not enforcing the new soft fork rules. And so if they are still following the longest chain. They are still following the longest chain that they think is valid. So if only a minority of miners activate the soft fork, in all circumstances, the upgraded nodes will go along with the miners that activated the soft fork. But the unupgraded nodes, if there's a fork between the minority hash rate that has activated the soft fork and the majority hash rate that has not activated the soft fork, the unupgraded nodes will follow the majority of unupgraded hash rate. And so we're not asking the miners for like permission. Right. We are asking the miners because if they are willing to enforce the soft fork, it makes our lives a lot easier, and it's like the safety mechanism.
Right.
And there's just so much baggage along with that, because that goes against like people who kind of misunderstand this process. It goes against everything that they think about what Bitcoin is. I mean, some people are just confused and think the miners vote on it or something, which does not happen, right? But other people are like, oh, that's terrible. Like, that's not what Bitcoin's supposed to be about. And it's like, yeah, but we're not doing it to ask the miners permission. We're doing it because it's nice to have this safety mechanism that unupgraded nodes, the longest chain, will be enforcing that soft fork.
Right.
Yeah, and this is like, even once you get a BIP that you want to activate, arguing about how it's activated is just like bonkers fucking insane. Like, oh, is it BIP 9? Is it BIP 8 with lot true? Is it BIP 8 with lot false?
Right.
Yeah. So I wonder, I mean like, if miners are so hesitant to endorse anything, maybe you want to do BIP 8 lot true, so that their hand is sort of forced.
Yeah.
You know?
and just like for the audience, BIP8 lot true.
I know, I'm like the audience.
Yeah. What that means is that, okay, we have, I'm just going to say we have CAT and we want to put it on the network. We have an activation client. So we have a new version of Bitcoin Core that now accepts these additional rules of enforcing, opcat. We hand that to the miners. And if we say lots true, normally what this means is like miners have the opportunity to go ahead and say, okay, we're signaling for this. And if, X%, and it's normally like 90 or 95% within a difficulty adjustment period, so roughly 2 weeks, if 90% of the blocks produced in there, have a flag in their block header that says, I've upgraded to this new version, then okay, great. Like in 2 months, we're gonna all say this is the new like canonical version of Bitcoin.
That's actual consensus.
Yeah. And so that's in the happy path.
Yeah.
Now, if you say lot equals true, what lot stands for is lock in on timeout or like lock in on something like that. But essentially what it would say is like, okay, well, we're going to give the miners a chance to activate this early. Let's say we put out the client in February and they all, in March agree, 90% signal that they want this. Great. In September, we're all going to start running this thing. And
regardless of what the miners say.
Yeah. And so what that lock in on timeout lot equals true means is that we say, okay, well, if you all don't agree by September, it doesn't matter. All of the nodes are going to start enforcing this upgrade, whether you all signaled for it or not. And what that means is that for miners that haven't upgraded, they might be producing blocks that are invalid. And so that means that Coinbase reward, the 6.25 Bitcoin that they thought they were getting, that they're going to sell into the market, is now rejected by nodes. And so if you did that, like that's your penalty for not upgrading. You spent all your hash power, you paid the power bill, but you mined an invalid block because you didn't pay attention to this upgrade.
Yep.
You didn't know that transactions that use CAT have additional rules.
Yep.
You didn't enforce those. And so now you've produced an invalid block. Like, sorry, you don't get your reward. You don't get the fees.
Yep.
This block's rejected by the network.
Yep. Right.
Those transactions never happened.
Yep. Yeah,
Right.
So like so the way that things used to be activated is they just used to be activated at a flag day.
Yeah.
Right? You'd say flag day means it's February 1st, January 1st, okay, 2024, and we release this new client and everybody's going to use it, and then on January 1st, 2025, this change is going to go into effect regardless. Right? And then you have BIP8 lot true, where you're like, okay, in addition to this flag day, we're going to have the miners be able to activate it early. If enough of them signal, we're going to activate it before this deadline. And then lot false is then, okay, we're going to do that, but if the miners don't activate it early, when it gets to this like timeout, it's not going to activate at all.
Right.
Yeah. And we're like back to the drawing board. We have to try a new activation client and new activation method.
And
Okay,
I basically do like, I think I like lot false.
Yeah.
Not because
that doesn't sound terrible.
Not because I particularly like giving power to the miners, but I think like, okay, like why not do something lot false, and then you've gotten some information at the end of that, and especially speedy trial. Speedy trial is essentially means that you do a short timeout, let's say like a 3-month timeout, right, with lot false, that if it doesn't get activated within that time, the idea is that, okay, after that, you're going to go, if it doesn't activate, if it does activate, great, we got the change. If it doesn't activate, now we're going to decide, okay, are the miners just being obstinate? If so, we will do something with lot true.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that's often characterized, speedy trial is often characterized as like giving the miners a veto. But it's giving the miners a veto, and then if the miners abuse that veto, we hit them on the head with a sledgehammer. It's not like we give the miners a veto and then we go like, oh, well, the miners can give us what we want.
I think this is what we call the checks and balances system.
The checks and balances, yeah. So like in my heart of hearts, I would go like, okay, let's do speedy trial, like BIP8 lot false, because that's like kind of safe, right?
Yeah.
And And then, okay, barring that, like, okay, let's do lot true. But if the miners are like, oh, we don't want to be political entities, we can't signal for anything,
Right.
then maybe you just have to do lot true, right?
Yeah. And I think the thing, like, it's interesting because if you read about the history of Taproot, there was the huge debate about this activation client.
Right.
So like,
there was more debate about how Taproot would be activated in terms of like speedy trial, lot true, lot false, BIP 8, BIP 9, than there was about the actual implementation. It's so bike shedding, like the idea that bike shedding comes from like, okay, well, you're building a nuclear power plant and then you're building a bike shed next to the nuclear power plant. And then what does everybody argue about? They argue about the color of the bike shed. And this is, partially because one of the reasons is because, well, the actual design of the nuclear reactor, like nobody fucking understands that at all.
Yeah.
But everybody understands what a bike shed is and what color they'd prefer.
Right.
Taproot is a fantastically complex upgrade, right? And so people are all like, okay, well, I don't understand that at all. I think it's okay. Like Peter Willow rubbed his beard on it. So like some of the good juju like rubbed off. I can certainly take to Twitter and the Bitcoin dev mailing list and opine at great length on what I think the activation mechanism should be.
right.
Yeah.
So like
I wish Peter Willow would rub his beard on me. I would get a BIP number instantly.
So what? Like, what's the right way to do this then? Like, what have you learned like through going through this process, and like what's the way to actually get something like opcat?
Yeah.
Like,
I think like step one is kind of like point out these silly inefficiencies and bottlenecks that exist within the process, like getting a BIP number, right? Like to give you the most concrete pain of that was I was talking with Armin and Ethan, who are the BIP authors, and I was like, great.
ASMR.
When is this going to be? Armin and Ethan.
What are their full names?
Ethan Heilman and Armin's dev. I actually don't know Armin's last name.
Got it. I just think it's interesting for like who these people are.
And so Ethan's been like in Bitcoin for forever. Armin's a bit newer, but like they've been kind of tag teaming the opcat thing. So I was like, great. I think opcat's cool. I want to play on it. When's it going to be on Signet? And Armin's like, well, I want it to be on there, but we can't have it on there without a BIP number.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is a testnet. This isn't even real Bitcoin we're talking about.
Yeah.
And yet, for some reason, Luke is the only person now who has control over whether not this gets merged into Bitcoin Core, whether this can go on a testnet. And so, like, there are these places like that where I'm just like, this is stupidly inefficient. Like BIP numbers
The
should
tail
be
is really wagging the cat here.
yeah, like BIP numbers should be objective, or even better, like let's get rid of BIP numbers, or multiple people can maintain different repositories of
You
BIPs.
can get rid of BIP numbers once Luke Jr. is forced to give me
once
a
you
BIP
pry
number.
them from his
Yes.
cold dead hands.
Yes.
Don't you think this
Yeah,
deserves
we
a BIP
haven't.
number?
Have you? Yeah, we haven't shown your old shirts.
This
So
is
I feel like they need to be.
the whole protocol, and it's so simple. It's the simplest goddamn BIP. Yeah.
And yet, not deserving.
And yet,
the entire Ordinals protocol
Yeah.
did not get a BIP number.
It's not the simplest BIP. I think probably the simplest BIP is like fixing Bitcoin's inflation bug in like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
Or maybe include the block height in the.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
the
but it's pretty
Coinbase.
simple.
It's very simple.
And it's cute.
It's cute.
But yeah, I think step one is just like, okay, let's be honest about where these power grabs have happened or these inefficiencies exist. That it's not hard because it should be hard. It's just hard because like the organizational machine has put this weird power structure in place that needs to be demolished.
Yep. Yes.
Now
That sounds like an attack on Bitcoin.
yeah, attack on having fun is an attack on Bitcoin.
And
So
absolutely,
yeah,
100%.
it's important
having
to
fun on the
attack
computer.
Bitcoin
Yeah.
every day. But then I think when it comes to these activation clients and things like that, I don't know what the right answer is. What I feel is that we are in a different, Bitcoin era than we were before. Like
Bitcoin season 2,
Yeah.
some might say.
we are like in Bitcoin Segwit era, there were like the people who had been around since the very beginning. And there were two camps that had equal, like, reputational sway, butting heads against each other, and at the end of the day, the small blockers like won. And I think what happened after that was the small blockers essentially got a victory lap with Taproot.
Oh boy, right.
Yeah.
Where we're like, because Taproot, as you mentioned, is a enormous upgrade. It is like, I think James O.B. described it to me, and I really like this analogy, as a rip and replace the engine of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like, this is not a let's go and change the tires. No, like you're ripping out the engine, you're putting in a new one, you're building it from scratch.
Well, then one must think of the absolute horrors that would occur from the victory lap of the Ordinals BIP getting a BIP number.
Oh,
Jesus. The spam the blockchain would see would be unimaginable. But then after, Peter and those people kind of got their victory lap, they got their Schnorr signatures, and then they took a step back, and like mad respect to Peter for being like, I'm giving up my keys to the castle because I do think I'm too powerful. I think if I say something, people will agree because I said it, not because it's a good idea. And now we're in this weird place where like kind of the legends of old have,
the old guard is
they've gotten on the ship off to wherever they go at the end of Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, right. The elf lands or whatever.
It's the elf lands. So like they're gone and we're kind of left with the remaining group, right? And it's like, okay, who's around? Well, it's the
who's around who's fucking left. Well, Gimli's still here. Great.
Awesome. We have the laser eyes who have been cultivating their vision of Bitcoin that it should ossify. Literally, for the last 3 to 4 years. And now we have the Ordinals camp, and then we have like the sandwiches who have, they've been around for a while. They make up a small camp. And so like there's not, I think for the first time in quite some time in Bitcoin's history, there's not a single like person or entity or group that can just show up and they're like clearly above the others.
And also I think that we don't have the forces of the big blockers that were on the side of pushing for larger blocks, which I think was very ill-advised. They're also kind of gone too.
Right.
The miners and everybody has just kind of given up on trying to influence Bitcoin. They're shitcoining, which is great. Like, let those fucking people take the short bus to like the corner and do their thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's also kind of good that they're also gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But also maybe we needed them. We would need them. They could come in and propose something fucking stupid.
Yeah.
And then the pushback.
The enemy of my enemy becomes my friend. Yeah.
Something good. People would exactly. Yeah. Like how bad are the fucking sandwiches, right? When like Gary Bilbert or whatever is coming to like make some terrible fucking change. And then maybe the pushback against that would lead to some progress being made.
Well, maybe the government should just get involved. You know what I mean? If the government starts attacking Bitcoin, then we're all on the same side.
If the government was anti-CTV, we'd get fucking CTV tomorrow.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I think we're in an era where we're going to have to see a new way to build this, consensus amongst these various stakeholders.
Yeah.
And so I'm very interested to see if like we do have more like product-led consensus in moving forward, like where it's like, oh, there's actually things we want to use. Like I want a fucking vault. I don't care if it's from Upvault or Cat or like the flying spaghetti monster gives me a vault. Like I want reactive security for my Bitcoin. I want to know that something's leaving my wallet and I want to be able to hit a cancel button if it's happening.
I want my quantum cat to evolve or whatever,
It's so hard because there's like a lot of the time also, people say, oh, well, like there hasn't really been like demonstrated uses of this proposed change, right? But building shit is so hard and so expensive that if you tell me that I have to spend literally like a year or 2 years of my life building something just to demonstrate evidence that people want some soft fork that has a slim chance of working even with me doing all this effort, it's like fucking forget about it. Fucking forget about it.
Yeah, ask Jeremy.
Yeah. This is also like why I mean like I'm very pro CTV at this point. Like very pro CTV. Not because I think CTV is the best option necessarily. I don't have a very, very strong opinion of CTV versus other covenant proposals.
Yeah.
But I think that it is very, very simple. it gives people a way to experiment, and people who don't want to use it can simply ignore it.
Yeah.
They can simply, completely ignore it as if it doesn't exist at all.
Well, but
Yeah.
they can't because they see it in their Twitter feed and that it annoys them to see the out group talking about
Yeah, I
stuff
mean-
and having fun without them.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It rustles their jimmies.
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
and they can't.
And that's
stand to have their
ultimately the
jimmies rustle.
bottom line of any sort of opinion.
Sadly, yes,
And-
yes.
It's funny, when we started with the quantum cats, it was literally like Bitcoin is stuck and we want to try and jolt it into having these discussions. And I think we've actually achieved that. Like,
Yeah.
no one talked about cat
No, I mean-
before, and now we're talking about these things.
Opcat is also very nice because, I mean, I guess we should say what the fuck is Opcat. So,
There's a song about it, you know?
yeah.
Have you
think
not
there's-
heard the Opcat song?
He
No.
doesn't know. I told you he
Oh
doesn't
my
know
God.
what's
I don't know
going on.
anything.
Yeah.
I sit in my fucking cave, all right.
I'm gonna see if we can get Jason to clip that in
Roll-
for like
roll
20
the tape.
seconds.
Leaf stack size and to return false foul type and each one stack top -2 foul type and each 2 stack top -1 each one insert.
You have to watch this. He raps the code in the bridge.
You love shit like that.
No, yeah, I do. But so yeah, Opcat was in the original version of Bitcoin that Satoshi released. Cat is short for concatenate, and you just take Bitcoin is like stack based, which just means you have these like this stack, which is like it's like a stack of books, and instead of each book, you have a string of bytes. And what Opcat does is it takes the first two things on the stack, it removes them from the stack, and then it puts them together. So if you have the string ABC, DEF, it pops those off, and you get ABC, DEF. And this is a really basic operation,
Right.
in a lot of programming languages and whatever. It's very, very simple. And it was in the original version of Bitcoin. But the problem is that, or the problem, that the reason it was removed is because it had sort of a naive implementation that didn't prevent you sort of having two strings on the stack, 2 byte strings on the stack of like length 1. You pop them off the stack, you get a byte string of length 2. You push it back onto the stack, you duplicate it. Now you have 2 byte strings of length 2. You opcat them, you get a byte string of length 4.
Yep.
You push them back on the stack. The important thing is that the stack element is doubling each time. You have 1 byte, then you have 2 bytes, then you have 4 bytes, then you have 8 bytes, then you have 16 bytes, then you have 32 bytes, then you have 128 bytes, then you have 256
Thank you,
bytes,
Miss
then you have
Wonder,
512 bytes, then you have 1024 bytes, and so on until you run out of memory in your computer and your computer crashes.
Right.
So I think it's odd that Satoshi removed it instead of just like the check is you just go, okay, well, if the result would be larger than 512 bytes or whatever, you're like, okay, I'm just going to throw an error.
Yeah.
Right? That's it. It's a one-line check. It's if Satoshi was probably really busy doing a lot of crazy shit, making sure that Bitcoin didn't like fucking shit itself. So he was like, okay, I'm just going to remove this. Like, but yeah, and so
It's funny, actually. Fun fact about that. So I learned from Ethan and Armin, the BIP authors, that there was actually always a stack element size limit in Bitcoin.
Really?
And everyone thinks that it's this opdupe opcat thing that caused it to be removed. But Ethan like dug through the code and he's like, actually, there was a stack size element limit of 512. And so it's still not totally clear why opcat was removed, but opcat was removed with I think 12 other opcodes.
the forbidden opcodes, we call them.
In a PR to GitHub called Miss Changes, and it has no comments whatsoever.
Satoshi also removed opbussy, which is
Absolute disaster.
good times.
But like I don't know. I think it's useful to kind of like draw this all back into like what is it that you guys are trying to do here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like all of this black pill
Yeah.
research. Like what is it? Is there an optimistic
Yeah.
output?
I think at the end of the day, all of us at the Taproot Wizards believe in Bitcoin and we want what's best for the future of Bitcoin. And what we saw and what this started with is like Bitcoin was stagnant. It was like nothing was happened. Casey blessed us, praise the Lord, with something to fucking do on Bitcoin.
All right. Yeah.
And we saw that and we're like, great, like there's something to do, and this is like, it's an inflection point in Bitcoin's culture where we can bring fun back to Bitcoin. We can bring interesting things happening on Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be the stale, stagnant place anymore. And I think like that has happened over the past year with Ordinals.
For sure.
I think the next step was like, okay, we do believe Bitcoin needs a little more functionality. Like I would love to see a functioning Lightning that people actually want to use. I would love to see, a basic smart contract functionality where I can take a trustless loan against my Bitcoin. But in order to do that, not the culture of Bitcoiners had to change. Now, like we need to look at the culture of like Bitcoin development, and I think that needs to get another like zap or jumpstart. And so for us with Quantum Cats, it was just, can we start this conversation again? Because I think the only thing we can all agree on is no one knows how we are going to how to change Bitcoin. Like BIPland is like Candyland because it is this like fantasy place where, like here's roughly what happens, but the path is fraught with peril. And so getting people excited about this, having people talk about this, we're now having conversations like, is opcat a good thing? Is opctv a good thing? And for us, if at the end of the day we build a bunch of stuff with opcat and like everyone agrees that opcat is too powerful, it's like crazy, it's going to enable like shit that will absolutely destroy Bitcoin, like amazing, great, throw it in the garbage and let's move on. Like let's get back to CTV, or whether it's like L-enhance or TX hash or whatever it is. But like I think we all feel that Bitcoin needs like covenants. It should have vaults. We should have a way to do like a native trustless bridge. And I don't really care how we get that, but it does feel like Cat has potential. And the more time we've spent with Cat, the more I feel like there is that potential. And so what we want to do is just say, look, here's the evidence. Here's what we're finding. Let's talk about it. And let's get the community to use these things. Like I want people to understand what a vault is so that when a miner calls them, they're able to say like, I want a vault because this is a killer app for my Bitcoin. My Bitcoin is a store of value, and now I have reactive security.
Yeah.
Amazing. Like, and so that's really like what all of the Quantum Cats, all of the missions, all of that stuff is pushing for, is just saying we want to bring this innovation back. There are things we believe Bitcoin should have. It seems like most people agree we should have these things. So like, let's stop dicking around and let's figure out how to get these things. Like, let's get out of step 2 of BitBland, of the bike shed, and do something.
Yeah.
And if we can jumpstart that process, if we can activate a soft fork, whatever it is, then we do gain a bit of like organizational memory about how to do that. We do like now, okay, great. Like we did the very simple thing of CTV. Now we can take on something a little harder, right? Like at the end of the day, I personally think the end point for Bitcoin is having a zk verify function where, and then at that point, like you can pretty much ossify, which is great. But like there's a lot of intermediate steps to get there. And so it's like, okay, we need to like kick this rock and get it moving somehow. And so that's really like what we're trying to do.
Well, that's what I mean when I say like Taproot Wizards is a psyop, is like, there's kind of this like weird 4D chess going on where it's like, you basically are like getting a bunch of people who are using Bitcoin, meaning Ordinals degens, who are the people that use Bitcoin, unfortunately, to care about this thing that they otherwise probably wouldn't know about or care about at all. And so you create like a contingency of Bitcoin users that all of a sudden are educated and have an opinion on this thing that could, in theory, be integrated into Bitcoin. And I think that's great. And I hope that people like realize that. I mean, maybe I was literally the only one that didn't realize that this is what you guys were doing. But like to me,
I
this
highly
is
doubt that.
To me, this is breaking news. Like to me, I got the tea on like what Taproot Wizards actually is. But I think I don't know, it's like, maybe it doesn't matter, like changing the opinions of the Bitcoin maxis. Like A, it might be impossible. B, it might not matter. But like, I think that like if any of them actually like tried to engage with this, they would realize that it's like a neutral thing at the very worst, like it's not an attack on Bitcoin. It's actually a nice way of educating people about Bitcoin and how it could be used, Yeah. And even if the decision is, as you said, like this isn't the right version of this. Okay, great.
Like that's progress,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
And that's just what we want to see. Like I want to see progress. I just don't want to see any more of like Bitcoin shouldn't change. Everything's an attack on Bitcoin, right? Like let's get back to what Casey was talking about, where you bring your facts, you bring what you have, we talk about it, and we come to a conclusion.
Yeah, absolutely.
It seems like a great place to
I was
call
gonna
it.
say, any final words? I think we're good.
I don't have any final words.
We're at about like 2 hours of deep opcat
This is great.
Bitcoin discussion. No, this is a great episode.
Yeah,
thank you so much
No,
for
thank you all for
coming
having
on.
me.
Yeah,
it's
it's
been
been
a pleasure.
awesome. And maybe we'll have you back on in some future time when there's some progress made on opcat or something else, and we'll see how things have gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I had to stake my claim as the first Taproot Wizard on the Hell Money Pod.
Oh,
right.
and I wouldn't want it to be anyone else. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Yeah, especially thanks to our generous patrons on Patreon.
Oh my God! Thank you to our generous patrons.
We love you guys. And I guess we'll see everybody next time.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.